Hey, what's up guys and welcome to Star Wars Real Talk. Today we're going to be talking about lightsaber battles and what makes a good one. Every lightsaber battle through episodes 1 to 9 are all distinctly different and all have distinct meanings and purposes for them. The lightsaber battle is never what it seems. There's always more going on in the background beyond the impressive choreography. The prequels blew us away with lightsaber battles in a way that we'd never seen. The OT never had very flashy lightsaber battles, but always carried a lot of weight and emotion and context. And the battles in the sequels, well, we'll get to those. The first fight I want to talk about today is Luke versus Vader in Episode 5. The incredible tension and unease the viewer has, knowing that Yoda told him not to go into this fight, and we know that he's not quite ready yet to face Vader. In fact, the first 30-40 seconds of Luke entering the room and walking up to face Vader, there's no music of any kind. The suspense has you at the edge of your seat, holding your breath, waiting and wondering what will happen. Then we obviously know how that fight ended. The conclusion to that wasn't necessarily, there was no winner or loser, and Vader wasn't even trying hard in the first fight. He was more just trying to toy with Luke and get into his mind a little bit. And the second fight carried so much weight and emotion because everything was kind of falling apart at the same time, right? At that point in the movie, Palpatine's telling Luke, look, all your friends are dying. Everything's not going according to your plan. You may as well give up now. And that's what leads into the fight, and the fight isn't very long. Because the original trilogy didn't need insane choreographed battles to make the movie good. There was already a strong enough foundation for a storyline that it didn't really matter how flashy or long the battle was. The movie was already great, and I know when I rewatched the original trilogy, I'm not waiting for the lightsaber battles like I am in the prequels and the sequels. Those are always the highlights of the movie. But the original trilogy didn't need that. I mean, look at this clip right here. Just watching this now, editing this into the video, gave me goosebumps. There's so much emotion in this fight and the soundtrack, and it's not exciting. It's more sorrowful and sad. The amount of anger and pain that Luke is feeling in that moment, and Vader's probably already been second-guessing his stance on the dark side at this point, whether or not he just actually wants to live out his life with his son. I can try and put it into words all day, so you're better off just watching it. Did any part of that feel exciting to you? It more felt tragic that Luke had to face off against his father. You can see Vader losing, but you're not excited for Luke. You're kind of feeling sorry for Vader because he's losing, and you can tell he's having a hard time, and he maybe doesn't want to fight Luke anymore. Maybe he just doesn't have the anger in him anymore to keep up with Luke's violent thrashes. The lightsaber battles in the original trilogy felt more like a standoff, two guys with guns aimed at each other because there was so much just tension and a lot of talking in between, a few swings here and there, and then there was a little bit of chatting, and then a couple more swings, and the weight was almost carried more in the words than in the blades. And when they swung their lightsabers at each other, it just felt so violent, They didn't have to be doing any kind of spinning or anything. It's just the weight of them clashing their blades and clashing with their words. There was enough going on already. That's what I'm trying to say here. Were the original trilogy lightsaber battles as cool and epic as the other ones? No, not by a long shot. If you were to line up the lightsaber battles comparing the prequels and the OT and the sequels, the original trilogy would have by far the most boring lightsaber battles, but it wasn't really about that. There's only maybe one or two exceptions in any other Star Wars movie that even rivals the emotion that the original trilogy carried in the lightsaber battles, and I'll get to those ones. I love the beauty in the fact that the first time that Vader and Obi-Wan faced off, and we didn't have any prior context or knowledge into their background characters or their upbringing or how they knew each other, it was still crazy when they met. Now that we have episodes 1 through 3 and the Clone Wars to get to know just how well Obi-Wan and Anakin knew each other, and then to see this face-off happen, it's such an amazing job that George Lucas did bringing this whole universe together. So we had the original weight of Vader and Obi-Wan meeting again, and then we got to feel that again, rewatching that with the perspective of the first 3 movies. It's just incredible. The first 6 movies are just so well put together. Granted that there were limits as to what they could do with lightsaber fighting at the time. Like, I remember hearing that the lightsabers were so brittle and fragile. They broke so many of them just trying to do even the simplest of fights. So they couldn't really go that hard. I don't even think they were allowed to hit each other with those lightsabers. So they were limited by the technology that they had at the time. So I really love this clip that I'm going to show you now, where it's a reimagined fight scene between Obi-Wan and Vader if they had like more so the technology they have now and what it would more look like on a realistic scale. Because everything that I said about lightsaber battles in the OT is true, but I think that Obi-Wan and Vader could have been done a little bit cooler. Like, they're both masters, right? So I think they would have had a more awesome fight scene, and not that they had to be doing wall jumps and stuff, but I just think with their skill, it could have looked a little bit better.
Our long-awaited meeting has come at last.
The circle is now complete. When I left you, I was but the learner. Now I am the master.
Only a master of evil, Darth.
There is no escape.
So anyway, that was an edited down, shortened version of the full thing. If you want to see the full thing, I definitely recommend you checking it out. I'll have the link in my bio. So now that we've talked about the OT, we've established that the original trilogy has laid out the groundwork for how a lightsaber battle should feel. There should be a lot on the line. And take note that I said how it should feel, not how it should look. Moving into the prequels now, we start to get into more of the flashy, choreographed fights, and we can't talk about the prequel lightsaber battles without Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan versus Darth Maul, arguably the best lightsaber battle of all the prequel movies. Unfortunately, I was only 4 years old when this movie came out, so I never got to appreciate it on the big screens, but I can only imagine the minds that were blown when this movie came out after only seeing the original trilogy lightsaber battles. This definitely set the bar, and it set the bar high. You can only begin to imagine the amount of incredibly long practice sessions they must have, the painful little whacks they took on the shins and the wrists trying to get this just right for the movie. This is a good transition point to explain why I think the prequel lightsaber fights are awesome and don't hold any less merit than the OT lightsaber fights, because they're awesome in their own way. This demonstrates a time when the Jedi were kind of in charge. They were bosses. They were at their prime, and we finally got to see that. While seeing Obi-Wan in the OT was awesome, but he was old and he wasn't at his prime anymore. He was near the edge of what he could actually do with a lightsaber, and now we get to see Jedi Masters fighting at their prime, and that alone is awesome and insightful into seeing a time when this is how lightsaber battles were done. And I mean, granted, before this fight, there was like, what, 1,000-year gap between Darth Maul and the last Sith the Jedi had to fight. But still, it's cool to see the Jedi fighting kind of in their prime. What made the prequel lightsaber fight special was the whole Master and Padawan fighting a Sith together. We see this with Obi-Wan and Anakin fighting Dooku. It's kind of a special bond you see them share as they fight against a common enemy. And I love that the prequels introduce us to this world of the 7 different lightsaber forms and styles, and while you watch this fight, you're seeing 3 different people wielding lightsabers fighting with 3 different fighting styles. Everyone is different and unique to itself. And what you're seeing right here is probably one of my favorite scenes in all of the prequels, how Qui-Gon sees that there's no point in standing there with his lightsaber out getting all fired up to fight. So he kneels down and he waits patiently. I feel like this defines what a Jedi should be, calm in the mind even in the midst of battle, taking a moment to just breathe, reground yourself, find your center, find your balance. We see Maul just aggressively pacing like a wild animal, ready to feast. Qui-Gon isn't worried. He's going to keep us calm. And to see that amidst this incredible choreographed lightsaber battle is, I'm really happy they put that in there, because they could have just left it a crazy awesome battle, but they really took a moment to show us how the Jedi should be. And thanks to this backstory of Obi-Wan, now we know how he learned to be so patient. When he's waiting and watching his master fight Darth Maul, he had to learn patience, and he had to learn it the hard way. It's easy to see how he was able to grow from this experience. So despite the fact that there is a lot of choreography and a lot of flashy lightsaber effects, there are a lot of little lessons that these prequel lightsaber fights teach us. Now I want to make another really great point that the prequel lightsaber fights do. There's storytelling going on throughout the battle that is not necessarily from their words, but more so the context of what's going on, what's at stake, stuff like that. Next, let's analyze the fight between Anakin and Obi-Wan versus Dooku, the rematch. So Anakin and Obi-Wan are on a mission to rescue the Chancellor from Grievous, who just launched an assault on Coruscant. So going into this fight, there's a lot going on. It's very similar to when Luke rematches Vader and there's all this other battles going on in the background. Very reminiscent of that. Anyway, the Chancellor's in the room. He's watching everything. Dooku knows that the Chancellor is actually Darth Sidious, and he thinks that he's doing some ulterior mission for Darth Sidious just by fighting Anakin and Obi-Wan. In fact, Count Dooku believed that he was on a mission from Darth Sidious here to get Obi-Wan out of the picture, fight Anakin, push him a little bit down the darker path by taunting him, trying to draw out anger in his fighting style, stuff like that, which he does do successfully. But then at the end, he was supposed to get captured by Anakin, and then Darth Sidious was later going to free Dooku so that he could continue to be his right-hand man. What Dooku didn't know was that Sidious had no intentions of doing any of that. He was just going to let Anakin kill him to really get his foot in the door of the dark side. So there's a lot going on already behind the scenes. There's so much going on here, even before they start clashing blades, and I just find that so interesting. I watched a really good YouTuber analyze this fight, and they talked about how Anakin and Obi-Wan started off in a fighting stance that they were in the first time they fought him, just so that Count Dooku would underestimate them and think that they haven't grown or changed at all from their last fight. And then partway through the fight, they switch up their fighting style, and it throws Dooku off. So there's all these elements of the context of what's going on in the background, the fact that Obi-Wan and Anakin are fighting him as Master and Padawan, the fact that Anakin's gotten stronger now, a little bit more confident, Dooku's got this ulterior motive. The thing that makes this fight good, sure, the choreographed fight and the flashy lightsabers are awesome, but it's all these other things too. And then you start to see the theme that the OT laid out for how a lightsaber fight should be. And to top it all off, after Anakin beats Dooku, that's not the end of the fight. The real fight's just beginning. The fight within Anakin's mind to do the right thing, to make an ethical decision. And then he has Palpatine pushing him to make a bad decision. All of this is going on right at the end of the fight, so it almost makes the fight seem like it wasn't the real climax of the situation. It was more this battle that goes on with Anakin's mind at the end. That's the real resolution to this lightsaber fight. So a lot of good storytelling and some flashy lightsabers swinging around. And even the fight with Grievous and Obi-Wan, while I admit it's just cool to watch, there's not a whole lot going on, but it is still an important fight, because up to that point everyone believed that was going to be the end of the Clone Wars, because General Grievous was believed to be the leader of the droid army, and if Obi-Wan could take him out, then that would resolve the whole war. This whole fight was going to end it. So there was a lot at stake in Obi-Wan beating Grievous here. And if you really want to nerd out on this like I do, Obi-Wan uses the Form 3 lightsaber style of Sorsu, which is the most defensive lightsaber style. And I love the way that Obi-Wan's just patiently watching and waiting for an opening, you know, kind of a nod back to in the first movie, in the midst of the most chaotic thing possible, lightsabers spinning around, Qui-Gon takes a moment to pause. Here's Obi-Wan pausing, waiting for his opening. General Grievous is a cyborg, meaning that he's partially organic, but he's got a whole lot of droid in him. His lightsaber attacks aren't just a random flurry of swings, they're calculated attacks. General Grievous knows literally every lightsaber form. He knows how to counter every single lightsaber form. His brain is constantly making calculations to try and think of the best counter for every single attack. Second only to Darth Vader, General Grievous is the most lethal Jedi-killing machine in the galaxy. In the novelization of Episode 3, Obi-Wan talks about how his skill with the lightsaber wasn't enough. He was leaning completely on the Force to guide his lightsaber in order to just keep up with General Grievous. And despite all this, Obi-Wan still is able to pull a win out of this because he's patient, he waits for his opening. We get to see a Jedi Master at work, who's also the master of the most defensive lightsaber form, defeats Grievous despite these odds. Grievous, like the coward he is, runs away as he was trained to by Count Dooku. If he couldn't beat a Jedi, he was told just to run away and come back, because he leans on that fear factor to win his fights quickly before a Jedi can ground himself. And while this isn't a very long fight, and it doesn't seem to bear much significance on the movie carrying forward, it does carry a lot of significance in the Star Wars universe, and it's definitely a milestone in the Clone Wars. This next lightsaber fight is one of the most important ones in all of Star Wars because it was the moment that Palpatine became Darth Sidious. He pulled the curtains back on his plan and finally stepped into the light for who he truly was, the Sith Lord. Something I never really noticed my first few times watching this movie is that all the other Jedi that step into the room with Mace Windu are Jedi Masters. These are 4 Jedi Masters, 4 of the strongest Jedi in the galaxy. I don't think it's a coincidence that the first 3 that are taken out are not Mace Windu, because I think Palpatine knew exactly what he was doing as he effortlessly glides through these Jedi. He picks off the weakest ones first because he knows Mace Windu is going to pose the biggest challenge, so he tries to isolate him at the end for a one-on-one. Palpatine could not have gotten more unlucky having to face off against Mace Windu. Well, in the end, I guess it still worked out for him executing his plan, but still, Mace Windu was one of the most powerful Jedi in the galaxy, and the only one to be able to master the Form 7 lightsaber style. In order to effectively utilize Form 7, you have to be incredibly Force sensitive, because it requires you to actually channel a bit of anger and aggression into it, making it the most aggressive lightsaber style. While the Jedi usually shied away from using their anger in battle because it can lead to the dark side, Mace Windu was able to actually harness that anger and use it in his form. The result is an incredibly chaotic and aggressive lightsaber style that is incredibly difficult to counter. Palpatine wasn't faking this, he was actually having a really hard time fighting Mace Windu here. There's some debate as to whether or not Palpatine was letting Mace Windu in because he was stalling for Anakin to get there. I think that everything just worked out the way that Palpatine was hoping it would work out, because of course he'd been meditating on this plan and channeling the dark side, so the Force was kind of leaning in his direction at the time of this conflict. So would Mace Windu have won this fight if Anakin hadn't jumped in? I think that he would have, but I don't think that that would have been the end for Palpatine. I think that Palpatine would have used his political influence in the Senate as a get-out-of-jail-free card. Because if Mace Windu was able to arrest him, he would have stood trial, and if he stood trial, it's pretty obvious that Palpatine would have been able to just talk himself out of it. So does it matter if Mace Windu was really able to beat him or not? It's hard to say, but you can't deny that this fight scene is dripping with storytelling. And of course, while this fight is important because it's bringing light to Palpatine's plans, it's also the turning point from Anakin to Darth Vader, which would have created an incredible shift in the Force towards the dark side, which obviously led to Order 66, and I don't think I need to explain any more about why this scene is so important. Similarly, Yoda versus Darth Sidious was just something that everyone kind of wanted to see. You know, it was like the best of both worlds. The dark side master and the light side master facing off. Really wasn't much more than that, but still, I wish that this fight had been an hour long. This fight didn't have a ton of storytelling to it, but it was still interesting to see kind of the good versus evil matchup, the showdown. You know, there didn't have to be much more than that. It was just a fight that everybody had been wanting to see. And if you dig deeper, you'll always find more stuff, like about how Sidious knew that Yoda had him beaten in terms of lightsaber combat, and Sidious preferred to use the Force. So by the end, Sidious ends up just trying to get Yoda in a showdown with him and who can use their Force abilities better than the other. And of course, there's one more fight in the prequels, but I think I want to save that one for the end. Let's move on to the sequels. I actually really liked the first showdown in Episode 7 between Kylo Ren and Rey, and I like that they didn't finish their fight. There was a lot going on in the movie, and it was a really good build-up to that moment, and I like at the end how they just kind of peace out from each other, and I think that was a really good setup going into the next movie. I love that Kylo Ren had already taken a shot from Chewbacca's bowcaster, which everyone seems to forget about. Literally, Chewbacca shoots somebody with that thing, and like 3 people go flying. Kylo Ren took a direct hit from it, fought off Finn with a lightsaber, who granted had no business holding a lightsaber, but still fought him off, and is now fighting Rey. This is good storytelling. There's more than just the fight going on. I like that they don't just outright tell us that Kylo Ren is super injured and having a really hard time fighting. They just kind of nod to it by Kylo pounding his side every once in a while, trying to toughen himself up. I love that it's not direct and it's just subtle storytelling. Rey's a big-time noob with a lightsaber at this point, and Kylo's really hurt, so it makes sense that they were kind of balanced, because Kylo wasn't near at his prime. I loved the setting in the forest and the snow. It was refreshing. There wasn't a ton riding on this fight. It was just more the pinnacle to a movie where Rey and Kylo finally face off. That's all there was to it, and that was fine for this movie. The movie already told the story, and since it was the first movie in a trilogy, I don't think anyone expected a big conclusion from it. Just wanted to enjoy the fight. I do have a couple little beefs with this fight. The one thing I hate is Rey's, for some reason, she just lunges into battle with her lightsaber. It seems like a really non-Jedi thing to do, to just plunge your lightsaber in one direction and just hope it lands on something. It's really odd to see that from the protagonist, but we can chalk that up to her being new. I did kind of find it odd, though, at the end how Rey ends up beating Kylo, because Kylo says, "I can show you the ways of the Force," and Rey just hears the word Force. Her eyes flutter a little bit. She gets super pissed off and just beats him with rage. And she was supposed to be the protagonist, so I let it slide, because Luke kind of beat Vader with rage. Granted, there was a lot more tension going into that one, but yeah, let it slide for the first movie. She's still a noob, right? Like I said earlier, it doesn't really matter what happens in this fight. They were just more establishing the connection between Kylo and Rey the first time, their first meetup. It's probably going to be a benchmark for their skill later on, just like we saw with Obi-Wan and Anakin against Dooku the first time versus the second time. Let's move on. Episode 8 is where it all kind of goes to shit. The big Episode 8 fight scene is the famous throne room scene where we have Kylo, Rey, and Snoke. Kylo kills Snoke, immediately dissolving all the tension that was just building up in the room. So the tension's already gone. There's nothing at stake with them fighting now except for the consequences, which are the guards who are fighting them, even though Kylo just killed their boss. So I'm not really sure what incentive they have to put their lives on the line against a guy who is stronger than their boss, but they fight them anyway, I guess, out of loyalty to the First Order. Now, while I do think that it's refreshing that the big lightsaber fight at the end isn't lightsaber versus lightsaber and it isn't good versus evil, they kind of team up, which is never really explained at the end why they teamed up here. But there are a plethora of issues with this whole thing, and I can't do justice analyzing it, so I'm going to show you a YouTuber named Robothead who does the best job possible. Also, just a disclaimer, this guy does swear a lot, so if you care, you probably don't, like I don't. I think it's hilarious, but if you do care, maybe just skip ahead to the next part.
Here we go, the worst choreographed fight in the history of mankind. Why are you spinning? Stop spinning. Kylo just hit the ground. And look at the other guy. He's about to go for his sword instead of his head. Where are you going? Why is this guy running off? Hang on. She just kicked 3 people with one kick. What the fuck? This is awesome. That kick's embarrassing. Just quickly, who are they fighting for? This is their new boss now. What would have happened if they'd killed Kylo? Like, who would they then answer to? Very confused man. Man, she's good. 2 points here. The worst thing to have in a spaceship is fire, but these guys stand in front of a massive wall with weapons that light it up like a Christmas tree. Secondly, what the fuck is this guy doing? This isn't something you slow down to see. This guy is literally waiting his turn. What are you doing over there, buddy? Fucking get into the fight. Oh good, more screaming. Remember when Jedis would focus? See this guy? This is my favourite part. He's about to throw his weapon away before charging in. Literally, throw it out of the shot so he can die. Roll the tape. What the fuck? Brian Johnson was sitting there watching this. Amazing. More floor hitting. Old Kylo doesn't seem to have much control. Here we go. You've all seen it. The disappearing weapon. Why they didn't remove it from the start of the cutscene, who knows? Now you see it? And now it's gone. But that's not it. He has another chance to kill her, and then the move that just fucks me off. That arm was pushing against her. As soon as she let go, that weapon should have gone clean through her face. And then, bang, that leg should be gone. What? Just nicked again? Okay, headshot. What? Why isn't his head off? What's with all the just breaking the surface? The nicks, the flesh wounds. It's their strong arm, you say, just doesn't protect the face. Now, people will say, well, you slowed it down. No one will ever notice. Or better still, I'm nitpicking. Lift your standards, people. They spend months working on these fights. Look at the training they went through for the prequels. See how many mistakes you can find in those films. How did so many mistakes get past so many people? This isn't a one-take scene. They would have done this over and over and over. Is it the lack of talent, or do they just not care?
Yeah, that was a long clip of someone else's YouTube video to include in my own YouTube video, but I just can't do it better than him. Robot Head was one of the first people to peel back the bullshit on episode 8, so I really respect him as a YouTuber. Link to his original videos in the description. And I wish there was more of a fight for me to break down between Kylo Ren and Luke. I mean, I'm not the only Star Wars fan to feel disappointed and ripped off with Luke's character, and how everyone since the original trilogy came out has been wondering how Luke would be when he's old and wise and a master. The amazing moves that he must fight with, and all the different legend stuff from the books and everything that's just built up this anticipation for what this amazing Jedi would do. So let's apply our storytelling principle to this fight. Luke is stalling Kylo in the First Order so the rebels can get away, even though he didn't want to be there in person originally. Or maybe since he's the oldest, wisest Jedi alive and wants to redeem himself for his mistake earlier with Kylo, maybe they don't even fight. Maybe he convinces him that they shouldn't be fighting and they should be allies. This is Luke Skywalker, after all. He was able to redeem his own father, and Kylo is still kind of family. You think that he would want to redeem his own nephew. Maybe this could be a chance for Luke to redeem himself and the person that he betrayed. Nope, he just brushes the dust off his shoulder and continues to mock Kylo. This is a really good setup for a good story in the lightsaber fight, and we just don't get it. So he projects himself there, stalls Kylo long enough for the Resistance to get away, but then he dies in the end, so it doesn't really feel that great. So, the only storytelling that happens here is that Luke stalls them. So he didn't prevent them from not getting through. They did get through. The Resistance had time to get away. But not before the Resistance made us feel like shit about how they didn't have anybody left and nobody would come to help them. What do you mean nobody would come to help you? You're the Resistance. You're the rebellion. That's what the whole Star Wars thing is about. There's no one left to help you. What, did you piss everybody off in the galaxy? That's kind of a shitty rebellion to be a part of. I mean, they're not even going to come to help you. What good are they anyway? So that's kind of the storytelling that's going on while this fight is happening. The rebellion wouldn't come to help them, so Luke has to kill himself, but not in person, just through VR. And all he does is get Kylo Ren really pissed off because he feels betrayed from his master. Rightfully so, because Luke apparently wanted to swing a lightsaber at him while he was asleep because Rian Johnson destroyed his character. And the fight that we do get just feels lazy. It's only a couple minutes long, and there's only a few swings, a matrix dodge here and there. It's mostly just Luke showing off and kind of being cocky. It really was disappointing, especially with the setup, and the background is just beautiful. We've never had a setup like this before. It just looks magical, like it could be the coolest place ever to have a battle. And it did have that showdown feel that the OT had, but there just wasn't a good fight that followed it up. It was just kind of a setup to nothing. There was no real fulfilling conclusion here. Kylo doesn't beat Luke, and Luke doesn't beat Kylo. The Resistance gets away, but they don't win. Kylo's character hasn't developed at all. He's just gone from mad to more mad. Me, and I think most of the Star Wars community, will never forgive Rian Johnson for what he did. Phew, okay, let's move on to episode 9.